Picking up from our discussion on the resurgence of group selection theories, it's clear that understanding how groups form and interact is fundamental. And that brings us right into the heart of how we instantly, almost instinctively, carve the world into us versus them. Our brains are incredibly fast at this using, happening in the blink of an eye. We're talking about milliseconds here. That quick exposure to someone different, say, another race, can trigger an amygdala response, that fight or flight center, before your fusiform face area even really registers them as a person. It's not just race, gender, social status. The brain groups things up lightning fast. This isn't some slow, deliberate process. It's practically hardwired for speed. Now, how do we actually prove these unconscious biases? Enter the implicit association test, or IAT. It's a clever little psychological trap. Imagine you have a secret bias against trolls, maybe because they're fictional and annoying. The test flashes words and pictures super quickly. You have to press a button for humans or positive words like honest, and another button for trolls or negative words like deceitful. Sometimes the rules are straightforward. But then, bam, the rule flips. Now humans or negative terms go to red, trolls or positive terms go to blue. Because of your hidden anti-troll bias, seeing a troll paired with lovely feels jarring, discordant. It's like trying to sort socks where one sock suddenly belongs in the wrong pile. Your brain hesitates just for a fraction of a second. Run enough trials and that pattern of tiny pauses reveals your bias, even if you swear you like all trolls equally. It's not about consciously thinking about troll history. It's about the automatic dissonance when the categories clash. This us-them divide isn't just a cognitive quirk, it has deep biological roots, and hormones play a surprisingly active role. Take oxytocin, often dubbed the love hormone. It makes you feel warm and fuzzy towards your in-group, more trusting, generous, cooperative. Great. But here's the twist. Oxytocin simultaneously makes you more aggressive, more willing to sacrifice out-group members for the supposed greater good. It's like the hormone takes the us-them divide and cranks the volume knob up to 11. Think about it. You don't get a hormone surge that makes you suddenly adore broccoli while despising cauliflower with equal intensity. Or like loving chess but hating backgammon. Oxytocin specifically targets this us-them dynamic, amplifying both sides of the coin. This really underscores how potent and salient these divisions are in our psychology. You might think this us versus them thing is uniquely human, but guess what? Other primates do it too. Chimps killing rival males, baboons getting tense when they meet other troops. It seems basic aversion to the new, the different. But it gets more interesting. Some species show a more sophisticated us versus them concept. Think about chimp groups splitting up. The former buddies can turn into mortal enemies. And researchers have even done monkey versions of the I-8. They showed monkeys pictures of their own troop members versus neighbors, mixed with good stuff like fruit or bad stuff like spiders. The monkeys looked longer at the weird combinations, like neighbor plus spider. This suggests they don't just fight over resources. They genuinely have negative feelings towards the other group, associating them with unpleasantness. It's like, those guys are yucky spiders, but us, we're delicious tropical fruit. Pretty wild, right? Okay, let's bring it back to humans. How fragile can these groupings be? Henri Tafel showed us decades ago with his minimal group experiments. The setup is intentionally absurd. You just flip a coin. Heads, you're in Group A. Tails, you're in Group B, that's it. No real difference between the groups, just an arbitrary assignment based on whether someone guessed the number of dots correctly or not. And yet, boom, people start acting differently. They cooperate more within their assigned group. They allocate more resources to anonymous members of their group. It's shocking. It proves that prosocial behavior, that tendency to help others, is deeply tied to group identity. We prefer our own, even if the own is defined by something completely meaningless like a coin toss. At least we resist thinking the tails people eat their dead, though that's probably not much comfort. This idea of forming groups based on arbitrary traits reminds me of those green beard effects we talked about earlier, remember? A hypothetical gene that makes a visible marker like a green beard and also codes for altruism towards other green beards. Well, our psychological lust-theming is kind of like a non-genetic version. We develop positive feelings towards people who share seemingly meaningless traits with us. Think about mimicry. In one study, researchers subtly copied participants' movements, like crossing their legs the same way. Unbeknownst to the participants, this simple mimicry made them feel good. It activated dopamine pathways, and it made them more likely to help the researcher later, like picking up a dropped pen. It's amazing. An unconscious act of copying creates a sense of usness, making the person seem more familiar, more aligned. An invisible strategy, feeling comfortable because someone slouches like you do, becomes linked to an arbitrary marker. So how does this apply to the big stuff? Culture, values, beliefs? These things are invisible, right? Until we attach them to arbitrary markers. Think about it. Two groups have fundamentally different views on cows. One sees them as food, approach A, the other as sacred, approach B. Clearly, two A's or two B's would lead to less conflict than an A clashing with a B. But how do you reliably tell who holds which view? Maybe you associate approach A with wearing a Stetson and boots, and approach B with a sari or a Nehru jacket. Initially, these markers are completely arbitrary. Nothing about a sari screams sacred cow worship, and a Stetson doesn't inherently mean you love steak over Krishna. What we do is we take these meaningless differences, create biased us-them distinctions based on them, and then magically imbue those markers with deep significance related to core values. And here's where it gets really powerful. We know from basic conditioning, Pavlov's dogs, Skinner's rats, that arbitrary signals can become rewarding. A bell rings before food appears. Soon the bell itself makes the dog salivate. The signal becomes the reward. Research shows that in some animals, the arbitrary signal itself becomes intrinsically rewarding, activating dopamine systems directly. It's the same mechanism at play with our cultural symbols. Those arbitrary markers we attach to values. They don't just represent the value anymore, they become the value. The pattern of colors and shapes on a flag, just cloth and ink, becomes something people will kill and die for. The arbitrary symbol transcends its original purpose and takes on immense power, becoming the thing itself, not just a sign of it. That's potent stuff. The sheer strength of this Utham instinct is perhaps most evident in how early it emerges. We're talking toddlers. By age 3 or 4, kids are already grouping people by race and gender. They start developing negative views of the them groups, and interestingly, they perceive faces of other races as looking angrier than same race faces. It's not just perception, it's judgment. And it starts even earlier. Infants, before they can even speak, learn to recognize faces of their own race better than others. Researchers figure this out by showing babies pictures repeatedly. They look less and less at the familiar face. Show them a new face, and if they recognize it as different, they stare longer, showing surprise or interest. This tells us they're already categorizing and differentiating based on race from infancy. It's built in, folks. So why do kids do this? Is it just learning prejudice from parents? Not necessarily. Often it's the environment itself. If a baby only sees one type of skin color initially, the first face with a different color will stand out dramatically. It's not taught, it's the salient feature. Timing matters too. Adopted kids placed in a different racial environment before age 8 often develop the facial recognition expertise typical of their adoptive parents' race. It shows a critical window. Also, it's rarely malicious intent. Kids are absorbing language and social norms constantly. Good morning, boys and girls implicitly teaches gender division, while those who've lost a tooth versus haven't is never used. It's everywhere. And sadly, the parents who are most determined to prevent it, like well-meaning liberals, often struggle. Telling a kid, it's wonderful that everyone can be friends, sounds great, but it lacks the visceral impact of concrete differences. It's often too abstract for a child's developing mind. Let's recap the sheer force of this us-them tendency. First, it's incredibly fast and requires minimal input, just a glimpse, a tiny cue. Second, it's largely unconscious and automatic, happening beneath our awareness. Third, it's ancient, present in other primates and emerging in human infants. Fourth, it's remarkably flexible. We can create us-them divisions based on almost anything, and then we magically imbue those arbitrary differences with powerful meaning. It's a robust, pervasive aspect of our psychology. So, what does being part of the US group feel like? It often involves a sense of superiority, especially regarding core values. We tend to believe our group is more correct, wiser, more moral, more worthy when it comes to religion, economics, parenting, fighting wars. It's not just about abstract values, it extends to our arbitrary markers too. We need to constantly rationalize why our food tastes better, our music is more authentic, our language is more logical. But maybe even more central than superiority is the feeling of shared obligation and mutual expectation. It's about trust, reciprocity, the understanding that we owe each other and expect to receive positive interactions. The essence is this clustering, non-random grouping, leading to more frequent positive exchanges within the group. This sense of obligation and reciprocity really drives cooperation. Think about the prisoner's dilemma game. If it's a one-off, the logical move is betrayal. But cooperation thrives when there are multiple rounds, or when reputation matters. Groups, by their nature, offer both repeated interactions and ways to spread gossip about jerks. And the evidence is clear. In economic games, people are significantly more trusting, generous, and cooperative with in-group members, even when the groups are arbitrarily assigned like in Tajfel studies. Even chimps show this. They'll choose to share food with a grooming partner, requiring trust over taking guaranteed, less exciting food alone. It's not just face-to-face either. People are more likely to mail a questionnaire if it aligns with their ethnic group's values. And remember the soccer fans helping injured spectators. Home team insignia makes all the difference. Helping the US isn't always straightforward. Sometimes it means directly aiding a group member, but sometimes it means hurting them. Look at how we handle making amends for mistakes. If you wrong someone within your group, you typically apologize to them and try to make up for it by being nicer to the group overall. But if you wrong someone outside your group, often the way you make amends internally is by being more hostile or antisocial towards another outgroup. And here's the kicker. The more guilty you feel about violating your own group, the harsher you become towards them. It's a bizarre calculus. Sometimes you help your own by hurting theirs. This highlights the complex, sometimes counterintuitive, nature of in-group loyalty. This leads to a crucial question. When we prioritize our group, are we aiming for absolute well-being for us, or just doing better than them? It's a subtle but important distinction. If the goal is simply beating the other guy, it makes sense in zero-sum scenarios, like sports where only one team can win. Winning 1 or 10-0 is the same victory. And we see this in Schadenfreude, pure joy derived from a rival's loss. Think about sectarian sports fans feeling the same dopamine rush, whether their team wins or a hated rival loses. But this mindset is problematic when applied to situations that aren't truly zero-sum. Viewing World War I as a winner-take-all contest led to horrific strategies like ceaseless attrition, where the Allies sacrificed soldiers just to ensure Germany lost at least as many. It's about maximizing the gap, not necessarily improving the absolute situation for everyone involved. And studies show priming loyalty boosts in group favoritism, while priming equality dampens it. Alongside this loyalty comes enhanced empathy for our own group. Brain scans show the amygdala reacting to fearful faces, but only when they belong to our group. See an outgroup member show fear. Might even be good news. Remember that hand-poking reflex? It's stronger when watching a same-race hand being poked. So how do we react when an in-group member messes up? Usually we're quicker to forgive them, rationalizing it away. Oh, they had a bad day, they're usually okay. But there's a fascinating twist. When an in-group member's transgression actually confirms a negative stereotype about the group, the response can be surprisingly harsh. Think about Rudy Giuliani prosecuting the mafia, fueled by the desire to dispel the Italian-American crime stereotype. Or Chris Darden prosecuting O.J. Simpson, or Jewish prosecutors handling the Rosenberg case, all driven by the need to counter negative group stereotypes. It shows this deep sense of obligation to the group's reputation. Now, what defines membership in these US groups? Is it like a contract? Think professional athletes. They sign a deal, play hard for the team, but the obligations are finite. They don't expect to die for the team, and if traded, they don't sabotage the new team. It's fungible, you can replace players. But then there's the other end of the spectrum, sacred memberships. Think religion, ethnicity. These aren't contracts you can negotiate or trade. You don't get traded from Shiite to Sunni. Converts often face persecution from their old group and suspicion from the new one. The obligations are seen as permanent, stretching across lifetimes, often tied to faith. It's us, right or wrong. Of course, reality is messy. LeBron James leaving Cleveland was seen as betrayal, yet people convert constantly. And the state relationship? Is it contractual taxes for services or sacred national myths demanding absolute obedience? It's a bloody battleground. Okay, so we've talked about the US. What about the them? How do we typically perceive them? There are consistent patterns. Often they feel threatening, angry, untrustworthy. Think about sci-fi aliens in movies. Nearly 80% are portrayed as villains. In economic games, we implicitly trust other races less. White subjects, for instance, perceive black faces as angrier, and ambiguous angry faces are more likely to be categorized as other race. Even abstractly, we underestimate the distance to a rival stadium or Mexico City if we're hostile to them. But it's not just menace, sometimes it's disgust. Remember the insula brain region linked to disgust. Pictures of homeless people or drug users activate it, not the fear amygdala. Disgust becomes a tool for othering. Feeling disgusted by their food, clothing, or customs spills over to feeling disgusted by their ideas. And then there's ridicule. Mocking the outgroup is a classic weapon of the weak, while the in-group mocks the outgroup to solidify hierarchies and stereotypes. People high in social dominance orientation love jokes about outgroups. Another common theme is viewing them as simpler, more uniform, less sensitive than us. This ties into essentialism, the idea that them have a fixed, undesirable core essence. Why does this happen? Often, it's fueled by a long history of negative interactions. They've always been like that. And it's amplified by not interacting with them much. If you rarely meet them, exceptions that challenge stereotypes never arise. Interestingly, we do this even with the opposite sex, despite daily interaction. So, them can come in different flavors: the threatening angry type, the disgusting repellent type, and the primitive undifferentiated type. It's a complex taxonomy of negativity. So, where do our thoughts about them come from? Are they just rationalizations for feelings we already have? Absolutely. We frame our cognitions all the time. Those on top justify inequality, we excuse appealing them exceptions, and we use complex reasoning to view them as threats. But the core of us theming is emotional and automatic. As Bowlby puts it, stereotyping isn't lazy cognition, it's often unconscious affect. That gut feeling, I can't put my finger on why, but it's just wrong when they do that. That's the affective core. Our thoughts often come after trying to rationalize feelings we can't quite explain. Think about the Cagos, a French minority persecuted for centuries, yet no one knew why. They looked, acted, and believed like everyone else. Or consider Adorno's work on authoritarian personalities. Prejudice wasn't about specific beliefs, but a general temperament unsettled by ambiguity and hierarchy. The feelings came first, the justifications followed. And here's the really scary part. These feelings about them can be manipulated unconsciously. Remember the priming examples. Flashing words related to loyalty makes people sit closer to us and farther from them. Flashing negative stereotypes subliminally worsens attitudes. In a real-world study, commuters near train stations became more anti-immigration and pro-English, only after seeing pairs of Mexicans chatting in Spanish for weeks. The manipulation was selective, and it's not just environmental cues, hormones play a role too. Navarrete found that women ovulating showed more negative attitudes towards black men. Our feelings about them, the very foundation of prejudice, can be shaped by forces we are completely unaware of: subliminal primes, background music, hormonal cycles. It's happening beneath the radar. This automaticity can even lead to magical thinking, believing the essence of a person transfers to objects. Washing a JFK sweater supposedly lowers its value, while sterilizing a Bernie Madoff sweater increases it. Irrational, right? Nazis killing Jewish dogs alongside owners, that's magical contagion. And then cognition scrambles to catch up with the affect. Remember the hanging chads in the 2000 election? Suddenly, everyone had passionate, coherent explanations for why the opposing side's interpretation threatened fundamental values, even though beforehand, neither side would have predicted such a stance. It's confirmation bias in action, remembering supportive evidence, testing hypotheses selectively, scrutinizing disliked outcomes more harshly. Studies show manipulating implicit bias changes how people justify their views. Scottish students reading about Scots treating English unfairly became more positive about Scots and negative about Brits, justifying the bias. Our thoughts run to catch up with our feelings, searching for any scrap of evidence to validate our pre-existing dislikes. So, how do we typically think about us versus them individually? We tend to see us as noble, loyal individuals whose flaws are situational. Them, meanwhile, are often seen as disgusting, ridiculous, simple, and interchangeable, backed up by rationalizations. But when groups interact, things change. Reinhold Niebuhr observed that groups are more arrogant, hypocritical, and ruthless than individuals. There's often an inverse relationship between internal and external aggression. Groups with lots of internal conflict rarely have the cohesion for large-scale external attacks. Conversely, highly cohesive groups might turn inward if threatened externally. But the causality is debated. Does a society need internal peace to organize for genocide? Or does external threat force internal unity? Bowles calls conflict altruism's midwife, suggesting external threats can forge internal cooperation. It's a fascinating chicken and egg problem. While other primates show rudimentary us-them, humans are in a league of their own. Why? Because we belong to multiple, overlapping categories simultaneously. I'm a vertebrate, a mammal, a human, male, a scientist, a Democrat, a Packers fan. Each of these could be a potential us-them boundary. Crucially, the importance of these identities constantly shifts. Imagine an octopus moving next door. Initial hostility because I have a spine and it doesn't. But then, discovering we both loved Twister as kids, that animosity melts into kinship. One identity can even stand in for another. Knowing someone's caviar knowledge instantly tells you about their socioeconomic status. The key is the fluidity, the ease with which we prioritize one identity over another. This shifting prioritization is incredibly powerful. Remember the Asian American women and math tests? Priming their Asian identity boosted scores, priming their gender identity lowered them. Brain activity changed accordingly. Race, often seen as primary, is frequently trumped. Gender is a huge one. Male faces trigger stronger amygdala responses to fear conditioning than female faces. Age can override race too. Occupation matters. White subjects preferred white politicians over black athletes when race was salient, but flipped the preference when occupation was primed. Even subtle reclassification works. Adding a distinctive yellow shirt to half the faces in a memory task made people confuse faces based on shirt color, not race. Our brains are constantly resorting people based on whichever category feels most relevant at the moment. This recategorization isn't just lab tricks, it happens in brutal reality. Remember the amygdala activation for other race faces? It can vanish if you shift focus. Ask people to find a dot in the picture distraction, or judge the person's age or vegetable preference recategorization, thinking of them as an individual, and the racial processing shuts down. Now, real-world examples. At Gettysburg, a dying Confederate general signaled his Masonic identity. A Union officer recognized it, prioritizing brotherhood over war. During the Civil War, Irish soldiers wore green sprigs to identify fellow Irish, transcending the American conflict. In Wolbudu Crete, a British commando and a captured German general bonded over a shared Latin quote, realizing they drank at the same fountains. And the famous W1 Christmas true soldiers singing carols, playing football, exchanging gifts, temporarily subordinating British versus German to something more immediate, all of us in the trenches versus the generals back home. These show how quickly, under the right circumstances, the lines can blur or vanish. We've seen different types of them evoke different feelings. Fiska's stereotype content model gives us a framework. We judge others on two independent axes: warmth, are they friendly or foe? And competence, how effective are they? Plot these out and you get 4 quadrants. High warmth, high competence, that's us. Think good Christians, the middle class. Low warmth, low competence, that's the bottom rung. The homeless addict mugger, the poor. High warmth, low competence, that's pity, the disabled, the elderly. And low warmth, high competence, that's envy, the stereotype minority group, the wealthy. It's a complex map of how we mentally sort and evaluate others. Each quadrant evokes characteristic emotions. Pride for us, envy for the competent but cold, pity for the warm but incompetent, and disgust for the low warmth/low competence group. Brain scans confirm this, disgust profiles match, viewing low warmth/low competence individuals. What happens when someone moves between quadrants? Moving from us to pity HL, like a parent declining into dementia, evokes profound protectiveness. Moving from us to low warmth/low competence, a trusted partner embezzling, is betrayal. Moving from low warmth/low competence LL to low warmth/high competence LH, like Japan suddenly becoming a powerful economic competitor, triggers alarm. And the reverse, L to HL, a homeless person returning a wallet, brings glee, schadenfreude. The nastiest shift is often LL to LH, degrading the already disliked LH group further, turning them into LL, which fuels immense cruelty, like the treatment of Jews before the Holocaust. It's a complex emotional landscape triggered by perceived status changes. Humans are weird. We can develop grudging respect, even camaraderie, with enemies. Think Wu1 flying aces exchanging pleasantries before shooting each other down, knights dueling, or trench infantry realizing the enemy soldier is just like them, enduring mud and rain, having families. But weirder still is self-hatred. Out group members buying into the negative stereotypes. The classic clock doll studies showed black children preferring white dolls and associating positive traits with them, a devastating finding cited in Brown v. Board. Modern IAT data show significant portions of minorities automatically favor the dominant group. It's a deeply troubling aspect of human psychology. This gap between what we say and what we do is huge. People claim to confront racism, but actual behavior lags. Trying to control these biases engages our frontal cortex. When we consciously see a bias, the amygdala flares up, then the prefrontal cortex kicks in to regulate it. More PFC activation means more amygdala silencing. Behaviorally, people with weaker frontal control are more likely to express implicit bias. Cognitive load, making the frontal cortex busy, impairs performance in interracial settings, especially for those with high implicit bias. Telling people to avoid prejudice during an interaction actually hurts performance more than telling them to have a positive exchange. It suggests the frontal control is strained. Interestingly, minority thems might use this control actively. African Americans primed with racial prejudice behaved more positively towards white testers, consciously managing interactions. Finally, how can we manipulate the extent of us-theming? Subliminal cues are powerful. Flash a hostile face subliminally, and people perceive subsequent outgroups as more hostile. Prime people with negative stereotypes subliminally, and theming worsens. Background music can prime the amygdala. Rap increases response to black faces. Heavy metal decreases it. Subliminal exposure to counter-stereotypes like celebrity faces of the targeted group can lessen implicit bias, and the effect lasts. Priming can be incredibly subtle. Unconsciously pulling a joystick towards oneself versus pushing it away alters brain responses to other race faces. It's fascinating, but also concerning, how easily these divisions can be nudged, often without our awareness. And it seems easier to manipulate warmth perceptions than competence ones. So, wrapping up, this us-them dynamic is incredibly potent. It's fast, automatic, unconscious, present from infancy, and deeply rooted in our biology and culture. It's driven by emotion as much as thought, often operating beneath our awareness. Understanding its mechanisms, its triggers, and its malleability is absolutely essential if we want to navigate our complex social world and hopefully reduce the friction and prejudice that arise from these fundamental divisions.